Welcome to the Retirement Guy Podcast with Gary Alden from the Kingwood Investment Group. In this podcast, we educate people in or near retirement so they can make informed decisions and bridge the confidence gap. Learn how to mitigate risk in retirement so you don't run out of money before you run out of you. Join Gary Alden and explore strategies on how to live a stress-free retirement.
Hello and welcome to the Retirement Guy with Gary Alden from Kingwood Investment Group. Today we're going to be talking about fiduciaries, and I think Gary's going to take us through the basic of what a fiduciary really is. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Just fine. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing fantastic. All right, we are talking about fiduciaries, but before we get started, do you have a trivia question for me?
Yes, I do. This actually came up in conversation the other day. I'm not really sure why. I can't remember the context, but the question is, how many bones are in your body? And there's actually two answers.
Well, I'm going to guess part of it. I think bones in your body, the two answers would be like when you're younger and when you're older because Correct. Of the changes in the body. And I'm just going to throw out a number, 240-ish.
Okay.
Does ish count?
So I like ish.
That's my guess. 240-ish. We'll go with that. All right. So I'm sure we'll get the answer later. So let's talk about fiduciaries. What are we learning today, Gary?
Well, we're kind of cover 8 bullet points today, Eric. First is, what is fiduciary? Why should why should someone work with one? A background on the fiduciary rule. What is the NACFF? That's the National Association of Certified Financial Fiduciaries. What is a certified financial fiduciary? What is their code of conduct? What are the qualifications to have a CFF designation? Number 7, what's the future of the best interest rule? And number 8 are, to me, the 3 key questions that everyone, when they're looking for a potential financial advisors, to me, the 3 key questions they should always be asking.
All right. That's a lot of information. Where are we starting?
Well, we're starting is, what is a fiduciary and why would I want to work with one?
All right.
And this kind of goes back to federal law, and it encompasses the federal pension and tax laws. And they are set up to protect you and me and all investors by imposing fundamental standards on their investment advisors. And individual and firms that are held to these standards are called fiduciaries. And the Department of Labor states that fiduciaries are required to act impartially, provide advice that is in their client's best interest, not in the best interest of the advisor. In other words, you put your client first.
Okay.
And the Department of Labor states that fiduciaries are required to act impartially, like I said. And additionally, fiduciaries are not permitted to receive payments that could cause a conflict of interest unless they comply with certain conditions for the exception, and also disclose that to the client if there is a potential conflict of interest. So that's basically what a fiduciary is. Kind of bottom line, someone that's going to act in your best interest. Now, Eric, to give you a little bit of background in this, years and years ago, when first 401k plans were set up back in the 1980s, the Department of Labor has jurisdiction on 401k plans, in other words, employer plans. And one of their rules on employer plans is that employers and the providers of those 401k plans act in the client's best interest. Well, several years ago, the Department of Labor decided to extend past 401k plans into IRA accounts. And they announced in advance, several years in advance, that IRA providers were going to have to start acting in the best interests of clients. And to kind of give you some background, when I became a financial advisor back in 1994, the standard then, and it still is true today, that if I get a new client, let's say, Eric, you're my new client, is I need to get to know you, understand how much risk you want to take, when you want to retire, everything about you. In other words, know your client, and then make a suitable recommendation. That was the standard, actually still is the standard to this day. Well, the Department of Labor came out and they said for retirement accounts that financial advisors should be held to a higher standard, and they should be acting in the client's best interest, which is a higher standard than acting or giving you a suitable recommendation. The Department of Labor proposed this rule several years ago. Lots of comment back and forth. Virtually every firm on Wall Street redid their platforms, came up with new programs to comply with the new rule. And then guess what happened last year in 2018, Eric?
I have no idea.
Well, what happened last year was this law or this rule that the Department of Labor was trying to impose was knocked down by the federal courts.
Really?
And basically what the federal court said is the Department of Labor had overstepped their boundaries, and they did not really have authority to impose this rule on the financial services industry. It really should have been up to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the DOL rule, if you read anything about it on the internet, if you've been reading anything in the paper, it's been knocked down by the courts. But now the Securities and Exchange Commission, they are working on a best interest standard that will be put in place sometime down the road. Now, one thing complicating this, since the Department of Labor rule was knocked down, several individual states have come up with their own best interest rule for residents of that state. In fact, I was just a couple of days ago in the Wall Street Journal, Maryland, the state of Maryland now has a best interest rule for their particular state. And several other states now have best interest rules. And that really could create a little quagmire out there, because if you got 50 states with 50 different sets of rules, it's just going to create a minefield out there.
Yeah.
So we really need the federal government to step in, Securities and Exchange Commission, and establish one standard that's going to be level across all 50 states. We've got to sit back and, see what happens on that.
Gary, when somebody is a fiduciary, what happens if they don't follow through on those rules? What kind of consequences are there for an advisor who doesn't follow the rules?
Well, one of the things is if you hold yourself out to be a fiduciary, in other words, I say, hey, Gary Alden, I'm a fiduciary. I've now opened myself up to litigation if I don't follow through on that. Now, if you just keep your mouth shut and you don't say you're a fiduciary and you just say, hey, I'm going to act and give you suitable recommendations, you're not held to that standard. But one of these days, all financial advisors, if the SEC comes through with the rule, and again, we have not seen the rule yet, every financial advisor in the country, we're presuming if the SEC comes up similar to whatever the DOL was going to propose, we will all, as financial advisors, we will all be held to a higher standard.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's any profession out there. I don't think anybody would argue that each profession should be working in the best interest of their client. You would certainly want your doctor to work in your best interest and not theirs. You want your mechanic to work in your best interest and not theirs. It's just kind of a no-brainer to me.
Yep. You are absolutely right. So because of really the DOL coming down with this rule and saying, hey, financial advisors, you're going to have to start acting as a fiduciary and act in the client's best interest versus doing suitable interest, an organization was formed called the National Association of Certified Financial Fiduciaries. And it's an organization set up, created to help provide financial professionals such as myself with information, tools, resources needed to make sure I am complying with the Department of Labor, ERISA fiduciary rules and guidelines. And they've taken that a step further by providing a extremely comprehensive fiduciary training program and then a certification process. So last year I went through that program, flew to Chicago, spent a couple of days up there. You go through a class and they send you home, and there's a lot of home study to do. And then you have a 100 question test, have to score 75 or better, and then agree to follow the standards set forth by that organization. We are set up to do that. And I just want to kind of click off some of the code of conduct. And some of this is really kind of neat. When I go through this code of conduct, Gary, you really kind of hope your financial advisor has been doing this all along.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there are some financial advisors who've done this, but I'll bet you there's a lot who haven't. But the three key components of the code of conduct to be a certified financial fiduciary, number one is practice the duty of loyalty. I should be acting first and foremost to always put my client's best interest first. Number two, the practice the duty of good faith. And that is my fundamental obligation to treat all clients fairly. And then number three, practice the duty of good care. And that is my fundamental obligation to exercise the skill of an expert and to only advise my clients in those areas where I really have the expert skill level to do so. Let's just say I didn't know much about alternative investments. Well, if I really don't know much about alternative investments, I need to tell my client that up front and don't try to wing it and just say, I don't really know about that. I should not be advising you on that if you're considering an alternative investment. Now, having said that, I'm up to speed on alternative investments. I was just using that as an example. In addition to the three bullet points that we just went through, also, it's my obligation to educate my clients. I need to provide, and I do think I provide comprehensive and unbiased education of clients, ensuring they have a firm grasp of the subject matter prior to them making a specific investment based on my advice. Also, we do a holistic approach. We consider all aspects and factors that affect a plan prior to making whatever the investment decisions are, and then give advice about any part of the client's financial plan or circumstance. In other words, we really drill down to really get to know the client. I'll give you an example here. A few years ago, when a guy came to one of my workshops, and he called me up. He said, Gary, really liked your workshop. He said, I've got $100,000 just laying around. What would you recommend to do with that money? And I had to tell the guy, I says, I don't know you from a bug. I don't know, risk tolerance, what you want to do. And I basically told him I couldn't make a recommendation. And he shot back, well, don't you have a hot stock idea or a hot investment idea? And I had to come back and tell him, we have some ideas, but again, I'm not about to recommend something to you because I don't know you. So again, we take a holistic approach so we get to know the client.
The only recommendation there is don't leave it laying around, right? I mean,
there you go. Do something. The next point is full disclosure. We always divulge all fees, or if we're working on a commission, we always divulge that, as well as disclose any potential conflicts of interest. Another thing that we are required to do as a certified financial fiduciary is to provide comparisons of all suggested products with detailed explanation of why we are, say, recommending this product over another product. And then, of course, a couple of things you would kind of just expect. One is confidentiality, protect and keep all clients' information confidential and securely stored. And then the last point is professional practice management. As a CFF designee, I must agree to run my practice with the utmost professionalism, using documentation and procedures set forth by all relevant government bodies, including the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Labor. So that's we went through a whole bunch of stuff there, but those are the key points on the code of conduct that I am sworn to uphold by. Now, the next point I wanted to cover is qualifications to even get a CFF designation. And of course, one is to pass that test, but also to even be able to walk in the door and go through the training, the candidate must have at least 10 years of relevant work experience or 5 years experience and a relevant bachelor's degree or higher.
Gotcha. That's good.
And then we must exemplify high standards of morals, ethics, and fiduciary standards of service. Again, we must successfully complete training and certification process and pass that 100-question test with a score of 75% or better. And then we have to, of course, go through a full background check and be in good standing with all state and federal licensing requirements.
Are there any? Is there any additional education that you need to attend or do in order to keep that designation?
Yes, every year there are continuing education requirements, just like you have in, most fields of expertise.
Good.
Just have to do for my securities licensing I think it's actually every other year. Same way if you have an insurance license or continuing education. The same way with the National Association of Certified Financial Fiduciaries, there will be continuing education required to stay in good standing.
I think that's so important for people to hear, because I don't know that a lot of the audience would know that you're always studying and you're always learning about new opportunities, new investments, new strategies, things like that, just because you want to be the best advisor you can. I already know that about you, Gary, but I don't think a lot of the audience knows that there's actually organizations that require you to take specific courses, specific continuing education, so that you can remain certified, that you can remain and you can continue to have those designations. That's just something that I don't think the general public knows, that you actually go to school every year. That's a lot.
Oh, yeah. Just like right now, I've got to go online and take a 4-hour class on Medicare.
Oh, wow.
That's one of the things we advise clients on is Medicare, and they're always changing the rules and there's new stuff coming out. Mm-hmm. So I've got to log online and take a 4-hour course. I know I need to do it. It's just finding that 4 hours out of my life to go do it. But I'm literally got to do that within the next couple of days.
All right. Have fun.
So, and then also has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but I'm running a Social Security class here shortly. And I've got an 8.5-hour course I've got to complete within the next 10 days, because the 8.5-hour online course covers just the changes to Social Security back in 2015.
Wow.
So I want to be up to speed when I do the Social Security class. So if somebody raises their hand and asks me a question, I want to make sure I'm giving them the correct answer based on the current rules and regs on Social Security, not the rules and regs back in 2012, 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, you're the one attending that 8.5-hour class. Your Social Security class for your clients is not 8.5 hours long.
Oh, no. The class is about 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Perfect.
So I don't look stupid in that class. I need to get up to speed on Social Security.
Perfect.
And again, really I don't want to say every year, but about every other year, I'll go to a class held by Lane Floyd on Social Security. She lives in the Seattle area, and she is probably the best expert on Social Security outside the United States government that there is.
Nice.
So, Eric, the last point I want to cover today, and this is the 3 key questions I think every potential client should ask their potential financial advisor, because I meet with literally probably 100, 150 people per year that come in. They've come to one of my workshops and they've asked for a complimentary consultation in my office. And these are the 3 questions I think they should be asking. And if a client doesn't ask these 3 questions, I bring them up. Because sometimes I think people may be afraid, maybe they're afraid to kind of ask some questions. And hey, ask me a question. I'm a financial fiduciary, and I want to act in your best interest. So everything is open and above board. But to me, these are the 3 key questions I would want to ask somebody. Number one, what's your background? Mm-hmm. What certifications do you have? How long have you been in the business? Et cetera, et cetera. You want to get to know this person, that the client's not going to be my client's first client. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's the background of the financial advisor? What designations do they hold? What is their level of expertise? So number 2, Eric, the second question that I would ask if I were a client interviewing a potential financial advisor is, how are they paid? How are they compensated?
Yep.
Most financial advisors these days probably work, if they hold themselves out to be a fiduciary and acting in the client's best interest, they don't charge commissions. They work on a flat fee. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty well how we work with most of our clients. Is, let's just say I charge a 1% fee to manage somebody's account. So I have a vested interest in that account doing well, because if the account does well, I do well. If the account doesn't do well, I don't do that well. Because again, I'm working on a percent of the value of the account. So if the value of the account goes down, my compensation goes down. If the value of the account goes up, my compensation goes up in dollars. The percent stays the same, but the dollars goes up.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I would ask a potential financial advisor is, will you act in my best interest.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's not law of the land yet, and it probably soon will be, I still would like to know, even though it's not the law, are you going to be acting in my best interest? And are you holding yourself out to be a financial fiduciary?
Yeah, and I think that that's so important because we've had this conversation before. You and I have talked about this, and you've mentioned on other podcasts as well. If you ask that question, you say, will you act in my best interest? There's really one of two ways that answer is going to go. It's either going to be, oh, yeah, I got you. Sure, not a problem. That's probably not someone you want to continue to work with. But if they answer the question, no, absolutely, I definitely will act in your best interest. I'm a fiduciary and I am held by a standard and I have to act in your best interest. There's your answer. That's what you're looking for. If it's just kind of a head nod, a wink and yeah, I got you. Yeah, that's not a good answer in my opinion.
Not a good answer. And I would get it in writing. Like we have a real nice brochure that explains what a fiduciary is. And really, it covers really the bullet points and things we covered in today's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got it written out, black and white, hand clients, so they know exactly where we're coming from and what we're going to be doing for them. And really, again, what a real financial fiduciary is.
Hey, if somebody's listening to this podcast right now, Gary, and they want to share that information with their spouse, how do they get that? Besides sharing the podcast with them, how do they get that brochure, that document from you?
Oh, just give us a call. I've got literally several hundred of these here in the office.
Perfect.
So we can drop one in the mail to you in a minute.
Perfect. All right.
It's a quick, easy read. Then, of course, you can always people go on the internet and find stuff. And as we all know, Eric, if it's on the internet, it has to be true.
Yeah, that's not a rule of thumb I want to live by anymore.
Yeah, there you go. So I think we pretty well covered what a fiduciary is supposed to be doing. To me, the code of conduct and the bullet points went through. Here's what, if someone is holding themselves out to be a financial fiduciary, here's what they're going to be doing for you or should be doing behind the scenes to make sure they really live up to that standard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's great information, Gary. Thank you so much. You gotta answer the trivia question now. Am I even close?
Yeah, and you're pretty good because I actually, I look around on the internet. Actually, every once in a while, I have a friend who's a big trivia buff, and he'll give me a piece of trivia, and I'll use that on our podcast. But I went out and looked, and you really had the correct answer. When we're born,
mm-hmm.
the average baby, and of course it's going to vary from child to child, has roughly around, give or take, around 300 bones in their body.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they're born. But by the time they reach adulthood, that number's dropped to around 206-ish, because a lot of the bones that we're born with, they fuse together as we grow. So you actually have less bones as you get older. So the answer to the question, around 300 or so when you're born. And again, when you reach adulthood, give or take around 206, because as my doctor was telling me one day, he says, some people have 12 ribs on each side. He says, sometimes somebody's got 14 ribs on each side.
Wow, that's a lot of ribs.
I didn't make this all exact out there.
Yeah, because here's the thing: if babies didn't have multiple bones in their skull, they wouldn't be squishy enough to make the journey out. So I know that the skull itself has a lot of bones when you're first born, and then obviously we want it to solidify into one, basic skull. So yeah, that's very interesting. But I didn't know it was that drastic though. 300 to 206. That's quite a difference.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, thank you, Gary, for your time, and thank you for all the great information about fiduciaries. And if anybody has those questions and they want to get a brochure or they just want to talk to you, can you give us the number real quick?
281-359-7900. 281-359-7900.
Perfect. Thank you, Gary, so much for your time again. And thank you all for listening to the Retirement Guy podcast with Gary Alden. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Gary comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you for listening today. For everyone at Kingwood Investment Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Guy podcast. Click the subscription button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Kingwood Investment Group. The content has been made available for information and education purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions that you may have regarding your investment planning. Kingwood Investment Group is independent of Next Financial Group, Inc. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Next Financial Group, Inc., member FINRA/SIPC.